Hello everyone, blessings on you all. Welcome to Truth in Small Bites. I'm Joan, your host. Today we're exploring the Gospel of Matthew. But before we dive into his writing, let's get to know Matthew himself, the man behind the words. With me are Eric and Stella, ready to unpack the story. Let's begin. Stella, who was Matthew before he followed Jesus?
Matthew, also called Levi, was a tax collector in Capernaum. That means he worked for the Roman Empire, collecting taxes from his own people, often with corruption attached. So, in Jewish society, he was seen as a traitor, an outcast.
Exactly. Many Jews, like tax collectors, were lumped in with sinners and prostitutes. They were ritually unclean, socially despised, and religiously rejected. And yet, Jesus looked at Matthew, sitting at his booth, and said, "Follow me." And Matthew got up and followed immediately. That moment shows the radical grace of Jesus.
And what's beautiful is that Matthew later throws a banquet at his house with other tax collectors and sinners, inviting them to meet Jesus. It's like he couldn't keep this good news to himself.
So let's talk about Matthew's unique perspective. So Matthew goes from despised tax collector to gospel writer. How does his background shape his writing? His gospel is meticulous. As a tax collector, he was used to keeping records. You see that same detail in his writing: genealogies, structured teachings, careful organization. He presents Jesus as king, but with the precision of someone who wants you to see every connection.
And he bridges the Old and New Testament beautifully. He quotes the Old Testament over 60 times, more than any other gospel writer. That's intentional. He's showing his fellow Jews that Jesus fulfills their scriptures.
And the genealogy and birth narrative. Let's talk about how Matthew begins his genealogy and the birth of Jesus.
He traces Jesus' line back to Abraham and David. That tells his Jewish audience, this isn't random. Jesus is the promised seed of Abraham, the heir to David's throne. He's the Messiah.
And Matthew emphasizes Joseph's role too. Joseph's obedience, taking Mary as his wife, fleeing to Egypt, returning to Nazareth, shows that Jesus' story is guided by God's hand, fulfilling prophecy at every step. And the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew includes the Sermon on the Mount in detail. Why is it so central? Oh, I knew this question was coming. It's Jesus presenting the Kingdom Manifesto. He starts with the Beatitudes, flipping the world's values upside down. The poor in spirit, the meek, the persecuted, those are the ones blessed.
And then he deepens the law. Don't just avoid murder, deal with anger. Don't just avoid adultery, pursue purity of heart. He calls his followers to a righteousness that surpasses the Pharisees, not outward performance, but inward transformation.
So it's not a new legalism, but a new way of living, empowered by God's Spirit. I know we talked about parables in one of our podcasts, but Matthew also records those parables that describe the kingdom of heaven. Which stand out to you?
Oh, that's a great question. I'll say the mustard seed. It shows how the kingdom starts small but grows into something unstoppable.
I know I talked about this before. I love the parable of the treasure hidden in the field. It shows that once you realize the value of Jesus, you'd give up everything else to gain him. That's Matthew himself, leaving the tax booth to follow Christ. And the Great Commission. At the end, Matthew records the Great Commission. Why does this matter? Because Matthew's Gospel starts with God with us, Emmanuel, and ends with Jesus saying, I am with you always. That bookend reminds us his presence empowers his mission.
And Matthew, the once rejected tax collector, is now entrusted to record the marching orders of the kingdom. Go make disciples of all nations. That's grace turned into purpose.
Let's each share a final thought on Matthew's Gospel.
For me, it's that Matthew proves Jesus is the king who fulfills God's promises and calls us to live under his reign.
Oh, this is easy. I was thinking of a friend of mine named Susan. My takeaway is transformation. Matthew went from outcast to messenger of the kingdom. That's what Jesus does for us too. And mine is that the Gospel of Matthew challenges us to choose. Will we resist the king, like Herod, or will we follow him, like Matthew? It's a decision that changes everything. And thank you for joining us on Truth in Small Bites. Eric and Stella, thank you for today's insights. Friends, if Matthew's story has inspired you, remember, Jesus calls each of us to follow, no matter our past. Join us on our Facebook page for more conversations and stay tuned for our next episode. Click the subscribe button below and please, by all means, like and share this podcast with others. I truly believe by doing so furthers the kingdom of God. Until then, walk in the truth that sets you free.